To be here with you and part of what God's doing this morning. I just want to say it was a great time to be an entry point this morning, and Lord just met us there. Started hearing each of our stories and how God brought us to this place, and so please, if you've not attended entry point, or if it's been a while and just want a refresher, come and step into the class and get reset and connected in that way. So I just want to make a autobiographical point this morning. It was 5 years ago this Sunday that I started as your pastor. First of all, as interim, thought it was just going to be for a number of months, and then we said, let's extend this for a while. And so just thank you for that opportunity. It's just great to have you, Pastor Caleb, by my side, and to be growing together. Others of you on staff as well, and I'm just delighted for that. It's just neat to see those people that I work closely with growing and developing. In 2 weeks, on the 16th, we're going to be getting a ministerial license to IKEA. Just another God's grace at work in her. And as we said when we announced it, this isn't like bestowing anything upon her that's not there already. It's just saying, yep, that's right. That's what God's doing in her life. And we relate and connect with her in that way and call her into that walk. We're a different church than what we were 5 years ago. Amen. And it's glorifying to God. Not that it wasn't glorifying to God 5 years ago, which says something about the next 5 years too. Amen. You know, it says that in 5 years from now we will be a church this different than what we are now. So let's keep pressing into that. Let's not be letting go of that pursuit of God. It's easy when we're not in a crisis to sort of just say, we'll kind of relax and take it easy for a few laps, rather than saying, God, we are yours. There is this world of evil that you're conquering, and you let us be part of that. And so let's join in and be part of that together. So I'm eager to see what all that means. Last Sunday, we started talking about Jonah, an International Sunday, and we want to continue that. There's a point in my message from last Sunday that I want to address this morning. I made some references and addressed Black Lives Matter and quickly moved into the Civil War in Sierra Leone. And to some of you, that came across as rather diminishing to your experience as African Americans here. And I just want to apologize and say I regret that came out in a way that seemed to compare and to diminish. I recognize the ongoing, systemic, and residual pain that is in the African American experience, and I just want to say I'm sorry for the insensitivity in the way that came out. Our lives are full of value because God places it there. I visited the African American History and Culture Museum this week and was just impressed again with the reality of that struggle, just as I am when I sit with any of you and hear of your struggle and the situation and dynamic that you are going through. And I just once again am saying this is a special place, a place where we get to have these common stories of insufficiency and injustice, but in the midst, here's God with His grace and His mercy. And let's be telling those stories to each other, making those connections with each other, not walling ourselves off. And I'm just offering myself to be doing that and to say, I want to be hearing your story. I want to be connecting in and understanding more and finding God's place of grace and mercy and healing and redemption. God redeems, He reconciles, He rises from the dead. And all of our experiences that are alienating and full of injustice, He wants to redeem and bring them back and say, Satan, you do not get the final word.
Amen.
And the only way that happens is if we slip away and just sort of wrap ourselves in our hurt and pain, rather than coming together and just offering it at the altar of the Lord Jesus and say, here it is, Jesus, be glorified in this. So thank you for being that kind of a church. And we're on the threshold of breakthrough into new areas in that as we keep pressing in those ways. And Jonah helps to tell us about that. So let's look at Jonah again this morning. So Jonah knew God. Remember, there's Jonah and there's the fish. The man is Jonah. He has a name, Jonah. Let's call the fish Goatee, okay? You were here last week, okay? So here they were. And can we have the map? Do we have the map just in way of review? And here's Jonah down here in the lower right-hand side, close to Joppa. And God speaks to Jonah and says, I want you to go to Nineveh. And somehow Jonah's GPS wasn't working that well that day. He gets on this boat and he goes to Tarshish, which is complete opposite direction, and he's saying, I'm running away from God. Now, and so the fish picks him up, and this is the first example we know of a super submarine transport system at work. Okay? And he takes Jonah and reverses course from Tarshish and dumps him up on the beach, and then God's there before him saying, Jonah, don't you have something to do? And he's like, yes, I think I have to go to Nineveh. And so he goes to Nineveh and delivers the word of the Lord, and we want to look a bit more at some of those other stages this morning. Last week we looked especially at sort of this end, this conversation, and Jonah's struggle to be accepted, the people of Nineveh. Jonah experiencing the people of Nineveh as an oppressor, and God saying, you who have been a victim must even know that my heart of love goes even to those who are oppressing as well, just as it comes deep into your heart also. So here's Jonah. When he's in Joppa, before he gets on the boat, before he lands up in the fish. And so in Jonah, it shows us 3 stages of his walk. Three stages. The first one is that he knew God. He knew God so that he had a way of hearing God. He heard God say, go to Nineveh. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. But it wasn't until he was in that belly of the fish that he prays a prayer, which we're going to focus on this morning. And in that prayer is when it says, I am saved by God. So I want to be saying we can know of God. We can have religious experiences with God without experiencing that salvation that says your life is headed in the wrong direction. You have to repent, move in this way, and move back in this direction that I'm calling you to. The third one, then, is that even after the fish spits him up and he goes to talk to the people of Nineveh, that's when we begin to hear how Jonah still feels this some sort of way about the people of Nineveh. He still pouts. He still gets angry. He still has all these things happening to him that is not really what you would expect from a follower of Jesus, right? And so God is there taking him and working with him, massaging him and saying, Jonah, I saved you, but now that you're mine, you have to open up these areas of your character and let me bring transformation in those areas also. So let's look at that this morning. Here in chapter 1, Jonah hears the word of the Lord, but he gets up and he goes in the other direction. He goes in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He's certainly not saying, your wish is my command. He's saying, I listen to you, and then I evaluate and consider my options. And God really isn't interested in being a consultant. He says that he wants to be Lord. And there's one response that you say to your Lord. It's yes. That is what we will do. So Jonah is here evaluating and saying, no, I don't want to do that. But the reason he didn't want to do that is because he knew the nature and character of God. And he fesses up about that in chapter 4, where he says, I knew that you were loving and merciful. I knew that if I went to Nineveh, that you would not follow through on that kind of destruction. And I wanted to see him destroyed. Jonah's heart. He knows God, but he hasn't met God in a way that's really arrested him and brought him to that point of surrender. We'll see in a bit that Jonah even had spiritual gifts operating in his life. How did he know that God was going to destroy Jonah? That was the plan. It was a word of prophecy. Jonah was going to Nineveh and was prophetically declaring, your city is going to be destroyed. And he gets upset that God doesn't follow through with that, as seen in it. But let's pick up this prayer of Jonah's. So Jonah has been a religious person, okay? He's gone to church. He probably even sang in the choir. You know, he did all those religious expected things. But he's carrying this rebellious heart. He's just sort of seeing God as kind of this piece in his life that he has to navigate and can use him sometimes to his own advantage. And then if God kind of gets in the way, we're going to try to go the beltway and get around this God piece. And so, but then Jonah lands in the sea, and the fish comes, and Jonah, inside the fish, prays to God, and this is what Jonah says. Jonah prays to the Lord God from inside the fish. He said, Jonah?
I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and Lord, you heard me. You threw me into the ocean depths, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. Then I said, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence. I will look once more towards your holy temple. I sank beneath the waves, and the waters closed over me. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I was imprisoned in the earth, whose gates locked shut forever. But you, O Lord my God, snatched me from the jaws of death. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord, and in my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. Those who worshipped false gods turned their backs on all God's mercies. But I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise, and I will fulfill all my vows. For my salvation comes from the Lord alone.
Then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah onto the beach. So here's Jonah inside the fish encountering God. In verse 2, Jonah says, in a time of great trouble. So here he is going into the sea, the fish catching him up, he's trapped inside the fish. Yeah, it's a time of great trouble. And sometimes we encounter God that way, right? God hems us into these certain situations, and we think that it's the point that's going to destroy us. And then God reaches in and brings us that salvation. When we're ready to look for Him, when we see that our options are exhausted, is at times the first time that we'll really let go of our own ambitions, our own plans, and say, God, here we are. Now we're ready to turn to you. We'll do it your way. And instead of giving you suggestions about how you work, we're open to your orders and commands for our lives. Maybe it's when you first of all identify as being a Christian in some sort of traumatic moment. Maybe it's later in your life and you said, I prayed that prayer, I asked for forgiveness of my sins, but I didn't catch this dimension about how it is working into the surrender of my life that needs to be happening. So for Jonah, it happened very much in this very traumatic, circumstantial point of time. Now for Ismail, this morning at Entry Point, he said that he had a moment, which wasn't at all when he was inside a fish. And so let's just hear from him in his words.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, yeah, we were talking about this experience and listening now to Pastor Glenn, Bishop Glenn, speak about Jonah and reading even more. I can relate specifically and put it into practical words now on my life itself. You know, while I grew up, I knew the Lord, okay? So I grew up in a Pentecostal church and serving the Lord and all that, right? So when I was around 16, 17 years old, I stepped away. And I was out for about 20 some odd years, okay? Living the life of the world, okay? And I am so appreciative and to God that nothing really bad happened, no near-death experience or anything like that that really kind of pushed me like this or do that, right? So it was the conviction that really got to me. So speaking at the entry point, we were talking, you know, that we saw, my wife and I saw this church being built back in 2004, 2003, 2004, but in 2004 is when I used to live in Woodland Landings. And so we saw this, and the movement, that conviction that I needed to do something, you know, and the struggle that I was going, that although I had the life of the world, it wasn't sufficient for me, you know, and the conviction just to keep on just hammering me, you know, you need to do something. So it was either do this or else. Okay, so it put me in that position that what am I going to do? And I'm so appreciative that I was obedient then to that conviction and actually turned away from the world and came to Christ again.
Yeah, amen.
So I knew the Lord, okay, He saved me, okay, and now He has changed me. Amen.
Jonah says in verse 3 that he was buried. He's in this fish for 3 days, and he likens it to being buried. You know anybody else was buried for 3 days? So here Jonah is, rough around the edges as he is, an example and type of Christ Jesus. That's foreshadowing that this salvation experience is going to happen for all of us because of Jesus. That we don't have to experience that all ourselves when we place our trust in Jesus, because Jesus has been there. It's His death that brings us life. The gospel for the deliverer is one of emptying oneself. The gospel for the receiver is one of receiving life, of receiving eternity and hope and fullness into the future for all of eternity. So, Jesus died to give us life. He did that not because He was a good moral teacher. That's insufficient to just say Jesus was this loving person who really changed the motion of the day so that people became more loving. That's not at all what happened. It stirred up spiritual opposition. Jesus ends up being killed for this radical message. But the message is not based on just the fact that He said, let's love our enemies. It's based on the fact that here is Jesus, the fullness of who God from heaven is, in human form. Amen. Coming in, becoming part of us, entering into your circumstances, understanding your life, living in your situations, and saying, I get it. I live that way. And I am now able to take on your burdens and take them unto myself and give you my life. Will you take on this exchange and take my life and live that out instead? Verse 6, it says, you snatched me from the jaws of death. You know, there's this thing about death that is final. And the person who has died doesn't do anything. So can we just grab hold of that a bit this morning, of how it was for Jesus. This wasn't the Father just whispering into Jesus' ear, yo, Jesus, go inside the tomb and play dead for a while. He was really dead. This was Jesus giving up His life, turning it into the hands of the Father, and saying, Father, I'm trusting in you that you will bring me back to life again. This hadn't really, not a lot of precedent for this, especially when the sins of the world are upon you. But it's this trusting relationship of Jesus saying, here I am, here's my life, I lay it down before you, you bring me back to life again. That's this surrender that we're talking about this morning. That is this plan of what Jonah is even experiencing, of saying, here I am, my life is over, I'm finished, and so I place it into your hands, and you do with it whatever you want. Verse 9 says, for my salvation comes from the Lord alone. The Lord is the one who saves. The Lord is the one who rescues us. It's not our goodness. There's not some scales that weighs the balance of the good things that you've done with the balance of bad things that you've done. There's no, well, we'll let him come in because we're grading on a curve. There's nothing like that. It is this, that the Lord needs to give us salvation. And this, if we just if you've grown up in the church, you've always heard this word salvation, but it just means that you've been saved. And so if you are saved from something, it means that you were in great danger. There was this incredibly terrible thing that was going to be happening to you, or that was in the midst of happening, and you were rescued from that. This nature of God is that He is a rescuer. He is one who draws us unto Himself. The story is told of a man who is trapped in his house because of the flood. And so the way of escape, of normal escape, is not there anymore. So he's trapped in his house, and he's on the first floor of his house. And the water is filling up into his basement, coming up on the first floor. And he cries out to the Lord and says, Lord, save me. And these guys come past in a boat. And they say, you want in the boat? And he's like, no, I'm cool. And the water keeps rising, and the water keeps rising, and then he has to go up on the second floor, and he's like, Lord, save me. And a boat comes by, and they say, would you like to come in the boat? And he's saying, no, I'm cool. And the water keeps rising, and he climbs up onto his roof, and a boat comes by, right? And he says, no, I don't want the boat. I'm waiting for the Lord to save me. And finally, he dies. And I don't think it's a true story, okay? And he appears before the Lord. And he's like, God, do I have a bone to pick with you? I've been crying out to you to save me, and you didn't save me. And what does God say? I sent you 3 boats. Yeah, I sent you the 3 boats. So salvation comes from the Lord alone. Salvation comes in the way the Lord chooses to send it.
Yeah.
And so when we're in that position of saying, I'm the one that needs to be rescued, we're not in a very good position to be saying, but not like that, God. I deserve better treatment than that, or I deserve this, or I deserve that. June and I saw the movie Sully the other week, and so, this is the plane that lands in the Hudson River, and the interrogation that went on around the pilot. Did he do the right thing, rather than trying to find an airport, which it turns out would have crashed the plane and all the lives would have been lost. And so there they are in the river, and the boat and the plane begins to sink. This isn't a spoiler because it's historical fact. And so the plane begins to sink, and so the ferries come, and it's like, well, they're not rescue boats. But the people didn't seem to quibble, It's like they grabbed a board, they grabbed hold, they took the life vest, they took what was there for them, okay? And so sometimes, in all of our theological wisdom and understanding of human personality and things like that, we sort of fuss with God about how He set up this salvation thing. it's so bloody, you know. It seems so painful. Did you abuse your child? And sort of like, you need to be rescued. It's not our job to tell God about how He does His work. It's our job to reach out and say, am I ready to humble myself and take hold of that? Or am I going to keep saying, I'm just going to sit here on my roof and hope for a better option to come along? So, salvation comes from God alone. And but this is this heart connection with God, this pressing in, this surrender from God, or this surrender to God. Let's I think sometimes we make Christianity a little bit too easy, where somehow, if I said the magic words, if I said the prayer, then it's like it gives me a card to stick in my pocket, and I whip out that card on the day I get to heaven, and if I have the card, if I said those magic words, it lets me in, and if I didn't say it, then it doesn't, you know. But this act of salvation is saying, I recognize that I needed to be rescued. I recognize that the direction that my life was headed was not a good direction at all. That it was not a direction that would bring me into relationship with God. The way I was trying to do it with my terms and my struggles was not going to lead there at all. I needed to give up. I needed to surrender and say, God, we'll do it your way. We'll allow you to be the one who sets the rescue plan. My salvation comes from the Lord. My salvation comes only from the Lord. That this is the one door that is the means by which we enter in and find relationship with the Father. Where it's not a, well, so you grew up in a Buddhist area, so you do it the Buddhist way, and we grew up in a Christian area, so of course we need to do Jesus. This isn't a world that's split by regions in that way. God is the creator of the whole world. God is the one who designs the system for the whole world, and God is the one who sent His one Son, who is there for every tribe, every nation, every language, every tongue, every culture, every person, every individual who chooses to enter in and say, we'll do it by your terms. We'll enter in with salvation by the way that you provide for it.
Amen.
And what we do is we accept it, as it says in Ephesians. That we sometimes get a little bit wrong. We say that we're saved by faith. We receive the salvation of God's grace by faith. But the salvation is done by the grace of God. It is not us that gets our salvation. But it's our faith that says, God, we will establish ourselves upon this fact that it is your grace, your unmerited favor upon us. That there's no conditions, there's no reason for this. If we didn't somehow get on your... there's no merit, there's nothing to recommend us. It is because of who you are, because of your complete character and nature that's full of bounty and goodness and fullness for everybody, that you reach out and say to everybody, please come unto me. I'll rescue you from this life of alienation and bring you into relationship. And so Jonah experiences the salvation. The fish spits Jonah out of the land, and they all live happily ever after. Let's all go home, right? Not so fast, okay? Jonah is still quite a bit of a jerk, if you must know. There's so much junk to work out of Jonah's life. But I just want you to know that he had this salvation experience with God. That this is not a deficient experience, okay? But now Jonah is saying, God, you've rescued me. But he doesn't seem to quite grasp the implications of that. And so I want us to be hearing the implications of that. When we say, God, please rescue me, I surrender myself into your hands, what does that mean? He's got you. He grabs you. His hold is upon you. And then there's certain ways that he begins to expect you to live your life. Now, he's not just standing back, though, and saying, now be good for the rest of your days, but he's saying, now that you've given yourself to me, I'm going to take over. I'm going to be in charge. I'm going to start putting my nature into you. I'm going to start putting my character into you, and we're going to start to have a remodeling that occurs in your life. No longer your own way, but it's going to be this way that comes from my spirit, my character, my nature, my being.
Yes.
And it goes easier when you cooperate.
Yes.
When your life is open to that kind of transformation. When you have that kind of expectation and knowing that this week it's this thing, next month it's going to be this next thing, and next year it's going to be something else, that is because none of us yet would be audacious enough to stand up and say, I think I'm fully like Jesus. Right? And so there's always more change. There's always more transformation. And so the security of life does not come from you saying, this is who I am, but it comes from saying, Jesus has got me.
Yes.
My hold and my trust is upon this fact that Jesus has rescued me. And that he doesn't rescue me and sit me somewhere and abandon me, but that he holds me and keeps me and walks with me and begins to give of himself into me so that I have a new way of looking at life. That I have power to be changing. That as I choose to step into that there is a power of God that comes upon me, that comes by his Spirit, that's at work in this world today.
Praise God.
So, Jonah and God, back to chapter 4 now, have this conversation. And let's look at, first of all, chapter 4, verse 8. Here Jonah he had just given his 3-day message that said, Nineveh, you're going to be destroyed. and now he's sitting up on the mountain above Nineveh, and he's waiting for the destruction to happen. And it's hot. And God has a vine grow up to give Jonah some shade. Isn't that nice of God to do that? And then there's a worm that comes along and eats through the base of the vine. And the vine withers and dies. And Jonah is mad. He's angry. He's out of his mind. And he says, death is certainly better than living like this. Somehow his contract must have been different than ours, you know. Like somehow that God guarantees him this way to be comfortable or something like that. God, if I surrender myself to you, then you guarantee me that all the rest of my life should be comfortable, you know. That the hardest thing that should be expected in life is moving my thumb to move the remote on the TV channels or something like that, you know. And it's like, Jonah, you met this God inside the belly of a fish. It should have given you a clue, you know, of what was ahead. So it's not about this comfort. It's not about that God is saying that somehow you follow me and it all goes easy for you. It's that I will be there with you. I will use your situations to be lived for my glory as you open up yourself to me. My promise is that I will not abandon you. I will not let you go. Up in verse 2, Jonah has this other complaint. He says, I knew, God, that you were merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. You are eager to turn back from destroying people. You think that he'd have been worshiping in this kind of words instead of complaining to God about this? His next phrase, just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive. And catch this, if what I predicted will not happen. You get that? Jonah's like, you're embarrassing me, God. I went into Nineveh, I told them that you were going to all be destroyed, and now you're saving them. My prophecy is not coming true. God, if you're not going to use me in the way that I want to be used, then I'd just rather not be here at all. God, if you're not going to let my spiritual gifts be the ones that are the prominent ones, then don't bother using me at all. God, if you're not going to let me be the one who brings my ideas into this place, it's like, did you remember that surrender word? Did you remember that we're placing you into the body of Christ? Did you remember that this is about service? Did you remember that this is about saying, here I am, send me. Here I am, use me in this way. So where are you at this morning on this? Are you focused on your comfort, having your shady vine? Is it more upsetting to you if you miss minutes of the football game than it is about the refugees that are dying trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea? Am I incensed if someone pulls out in front of me when I'm driving that causes me to slow down more than I am about the plight of the homeless and hungry? Because obviously if they're in that problem, they must have brought it upon themselves. Or are you at this place that, no, I've conquered that one, and so I'll live in God's way, but I'd like to be recognized for it, please. You know, like the guy who catches the interception in football. But it's because of somebody else who tipped the ball that knocked it into his hands. And that was because there was a defensive line that was rushing the quarterback and he had to hurry the ball. And so there's this whole team effort that allows the ball to fall into his hands. And he gets to catch the interception and preserve the win for his team, or whatever it is. So God's the one that plans and positions us. We carry this attitude in our heart that says, your hold on us is what we need. And Jonah, the story of Jonah ends with these words from God, which we looked at last week. You feel sorry about the plant, though you did nothing to put it there. It came quickly and died quickly. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people living in spiritual darkness, not to mention all the animals. Shouldn't I feel sorry for such a great city? And so God places before Jonah this question. It's a question about who God is. And it's God saying, I'd like you to be thinking about this from my perspective of truth and wholeness, rather than your perspective of whatever it is that you're going through at the moment. Whatever those things are that you're wrapped up in. So God's speaking to you to say, are you at that point where you're saying, yeah, I know God, but I experience Him in this religious reality. I haven't yet gotten to that place of the surrender to God. Are you ready to make that point of surrender today and say, today is the day that I'll experience that salvation of God? Or are you in that place where you're saying, yes, I've experienced that surrender, but I haven't quite gotten on track, that this is God then taking me, changing my character, changing my nature, so that the plans and purposes of who Jesus is can be put into place. The plans and purposes of Jesus lived out in your personality. Isn't that cool? Isn't that awesome? And you're saying, I want to get back on that track today. That way to be saying that God, yes, this is your life, and I want you to be living it. Maybe you're saying an option that isn't presented in Jonah. There's no real positive options here. It's just, you are at that point of saying, yes, God, here I am. I know that my life is surrendered into your hands. Take me the next step today. Speak to me. Show me what that is. Show me how my life can be lived more and more into your fullness, into your holiness, into your wholeness. Changing me, changing the world around me, because I am surrendered by you, because you are changing and restoring my character and my being.
Amen.
Once again, as we come into worship, will you allow the Spirit to speak to you? Open your heart in worship and just allow that Holy Spirit of God to be ministering into you, to be showing you where He sees you at, and be doing it with an open, ready heart, knowing that He's not going to cast you aside. He's not going to say, I've had enough with you. But He's always going to be saying, I'm ready to receive you. I'm ready to meet you